If at any point you see my eye twitching profusely, it's probably because I've tried a new glitter eyeliner and there's currently glitter fragments falling into my eyes. Hopefully it looks cute because I'm literally scratching my corneas as we speak. Hey there guys, my name is Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for episode 32 of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. Contrary to my makeup, no, you haven't tuned into a random clown on YouTube. We talk about true crime over here. So if you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you every Friday with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our bonus Weirdo Wednesday episodes, where I'll discuss something spooky I've heard. If you're feeling extra fancy today, then please hit that notification bell so you don't miss any upcoming episodes. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime and crimes against children. If that's a trigger point for you, then please do turn away now. Dudes and dudettes, guess what? We've had a very exciting week. I hit 5k subs! I'm gonna invest in a baseball cap and some sunglasses since I'm so famous. In all seriousness, guys, I just want to say a massive thank you to each and every one of you that tune in. It's actually so amazing to me that more than 5 of you voluntarily watch this face every week, especially with the blue eyeshadow. But moving on, I love my wee channel. It makes me so happy. And yeah, I wouldn't be here without everybody's words of encouragement. You're all amazing and I love y'all. But enough of the lovey-dovey shiznit, because I know that's not why you're here. You're here for some true crime. But this week's case is pretty grisly and it's actually very infamous. If you don't know this case by the people who were involved, then there is one phrase I could say that will probably jog your memory. 3 words: silly string murders. It's had podcasts, books written about it, documentaries, you name it. And I know in this day and age, as a society, we love to judge, okay? We're judgy people. It's just human nature, especially with social media these days. Everybody's got an opinion about everybody else. How true does an opinion become the more people who believe it? Say, for example, one person thinks I'm a murderer, then 1,000 people think I'm a murderer. Just because more people believe it, does that make it any more true? I'll let you decide. In the case of Darlie Routier, from mother to monster. At 1 a.m. on the 6th of June 1996 in Rowlett, Texas, a young 26-year-old mother, Darlie Routier, was settling in for the night with her 6-year-old son Devon and her 5-year-old little boy named Damon. As Darlie's husband Darren, who was 28 at the time, headed upstairs to bed with their 7-month-old third son Drake, Darlie decided to have a little sleepover with her 2 eldest sons downstairs in the family's living room. They got their blankets, their snacks, and built almost kind of a tent on the floor. The kids were so excited to watch a movie and stay up late with their mum, and this was a nice little treat for them. At around 10 to 2 in the morning, Darlie dozed off, watching over her boys as they slept. Or so she claims. Because only 2.5 hours later, Darlie would make a terrifying 911 phone call, begging dispatchers to save her sons' lives. But we're going to hold our horses, and as Craig David says, let's rewind. Darlie Lynn Peck was born on the 4th of January 1970. We all spoke about this before, you know, Capricorns, awful people, bear that in mind. However, my mum and best friend were both born on the exact same day as Darlie, the 4th of January, and they're lovely people, so you can't always judge that at face value. Darlie was raised in Altoona, Pennsylvania. She was the eldest child to her father, Larry Peck, and her mother, Darlie Key. Yes, you heard me right. She was named the exact same name as her mother, which I've never really been the biggest fan of. No offence meant to anyone who has got the same name as their mother. I just always imagine it causes a lot more confusion than it's worth. You know, you go to the doctor's office and you're like, this is Susan. I'm Susan too. Darlie would later have 2 other sisters, and there was quite a big age gap between she and her younger sisters, and they were named Dana and Danielle. Also odd, my sister's name is Danielle. In her early teens, Darlie actually moved to a different town. She and her mother moved to a town of Lubbock, Texas. I think it's Lubbock or Lubbock. Darlie's mother and father had unfortunately separated, and Darlie's mum soon started working at a local restaurant to make ends meet. When Darlie was 15, her mother actually introduced her to someone that she'd met through the restaurant, a man named Darren Routier. Darren was 17 at the time, and even though he had started off as just a busboy, he'd actually managed to work his way up to assistant manager at the local Western Sizzler restaurant. I just think American restaurants just have so much funner names, you know. You've got Denny's, you've got Ponderosa, and then you have the Western Sizzler. Just sounds quite fun, and Darlie allegedly thought so too, since she would often hang around the restaurant, and on Mother's Day was the fateful day that she would finally run into Darren, and she could see why her mum thought he was amazing, and he felt the same about her. Darlie at the time was a beautiful, blonde, athletic cheerleader, and she had these piercing kind of greeny hazel eyes. She was really, really striking, and her mother, Darlie Sr., had actually told her about this athletic dude that she was working with. He's athletic, he runs track, he plays football, he weightlifts, and not only that, he has a keen mind for electronics, so this guy's going places. Darren was instantly blown away by Darlie. He said that all mums kind of say their daughters are beautiful, so he wasn't really sure what was going to walk in the door, and it's true, you get those mums on Facebook, my child is gorgeous. That mother's bond is very strong. But in this case, Darlie's mother was 100% accurate. Her daughter had completely blown this guy away. Now, a big misconception about this case is that Darlie had met this rich guy and was only after his money, and she was a major gold digger, when that's not true. When she first met Darren, they were literally kids in high school. He didn't have any money to his own name, and I think that's something that a lot of people do misconstrue in this case. Darren was an extremely hard worker. As I said, he'd worked his way through the Sizzler restaurant during high school, and he was doing really well for himself. He had a keen eye for electronics and computers. He was promoted from assistant manager to manager within the restaurant, and he also decided to propose to a then 16-year-old Darlie during a family ski trip to, and wait for it, because I don't think you're mentally prepared for this one, Purgatory, Colorado. Literally couldn't make this up if I tried. It's like the universe is saying something to you, Darren. Don't do it. Turn back. But he didn't turn back, boys and girls, and after a short while, the couple actually moved to Dallas so that he could further his career in electronics. He attended classes at the Video Technical Institute and graduated after 14 months. The couple actually worked really hard to make their relationship work. They thought that if they put in the effort now, it would be worth it in the long run, and they could have a life to be proud of. As Darren worked his way up at a circuit board manufacturing company called Cuplex or Qplex, let's glaze over that one like a Krispy Kreme donut because I don't know how to pronounce it. Darlie also worked at the company with Darren on the factory line, so the two were a little kind of power couple just doing their best to make it work. It was long hours for both Darren and Darlie, but they knew that it would pay off in the end, and they really wanted to get their own home and move out of their small one-bedroom apartment. At the age of 18 and 20, Darlie and Darren were married, and shortly after this, on June 14th, 1989, they welcomed their first child, a baby boy named Devon Routier. Soon after the birth of Devon, the family were able to move into their very own first family home. Darren was doing really well professionally at this time, and he and Darlie had spoken about him going out on his own into his own company. Now, he was a little bit reluctant to work for himself and be self-employed. He'd said that several of his family members, his mum and dad, his grandparents, they were all self-employed. He liked the idea of having a steady paycheck, all the benefits, health benefits that come with working for a big company, and not only that, he also wanted to retire at quite a young age so that he could enjoy his life. But Darren did slowly realise that he was never really going to make as much money working for someone else's company as he would branching out on his own. phone. During this time, Darren would create his own circuit boards and he would sell them over for a small profit. This began something that they would do as a couple, Darlie and Darren. They would sit on the couch on Friday nights and the two would work away on these wee circuit boards. Darlie said it was one of the best times when they basically didn't really have much, but they were extremely happy. Pretty soon, this Friday night hobby turned into a lucrative business and Darren had no choice but to leave his work and get his own office. The business actually grew from strength to strength pretty quickly and the family were suddenly living a whole other type of life. Like, we're talking the high life, the champagne lifestyle that some of us, like me, will never taste. They decided to move yet again into a massive mansion of a home. The home was at 5801 Eagle Drive in Rowlett, and let me tell you, it was pretty big. Like now when you watch Home Alone and you look at Kevin McAllister's house and you wonder, I wonder what his dad did. That's exactly what you would have been thinking about the Routiers. They appeared to have everything, but the house needed a little bit of a nip and tuck. So the family actually worked really hard on getting it up to scratch. Darren would do the renovations whilst Darlie would furnish the home. She filled the family home with designer couches, all the latest gadgets and gizmos, which in 1996 probably wasn't much. I think we literally had a couple of channels on television. That was about it. Darlie was said to have quite expensive taste. She was a fancy little lady and she even spent $12,000 on curtains, or in the US, drapes. Now, depending on your budget for furniture, to me that's a wee bit highbrow. Also, let's bear in mind this was back in the 90s, so if she was spending that money today, it would have actually been $22,500. I just got a little bit sick in my mouth there. Who knew curtains were so expensive? No wonder Beck from You couldn't afford them. Darlie was no longer working at this time. She was a dedicated full-time homemaker and mother, and all the kids in the neighbourhood had the best things to say about her. Their home was actually known as the Nintendo home because, like I said, they had all the gadgets, and she would actually dedicate her time to baking the kids cookies. Darlie's friends said that she would constantly welcome all the neighbourhood kids into her house with open arms. Darlie's two boys absolutely worshipped their mother. Her eldest child, Devon Rush, lived up to his middle name. He was really lively, energetic, he had a lot of passion, and yeah, he was just a wee bit crazy and a little bit wild. Meanwhile, his younger brother, Damon, he was a little bit more reserved, a little bit quieter, a total mama's boy, and he just loved to be cuddled. He was just completely different from his brother, but the two got along so well. It was like PB&J, and they went together perfectly. Darlie Routier wasn't a regular mom. She was a cool mom. If you don't get the reference, I'm sorry, we can't be friends. She was super pretty, glamorous, she had bleach blonde hair, she always wore the best of makeup, she loved her jewellery, she was into a lot of that blang blang, and on every finger she would have a ring. She did also have this kind of Marilyn Monroe vibe going on about her. She had had a breast augmentation after feeling a little bit self-conscious about her chest after the birth of her two boys. I mean, boys, you won't know this, but gravity can be a wee madam. Sometimes we need a little lift. At the end of 1995, the family had bought a boat, they'd bought a Jaguar, they had fully furnished this gorgeous house, and they were living the dream. And Darlie went on to have a third son, a little boy named Drake. Now, it was said at this point in late 1995, things started to shift a little bit for Darlie mentally. She suffered from postnatal depression and it got really down sometimes. It all seemed to reach a head on May 3rd, 1996, when Darlie had actually written a suicide note saying that she planned to overdose. She apologised to her children, said she loved them so much, but that she just couldn't do it anymore. Darlie never went ahead with the suicide attempt, but the cracks were there. Darlie's friends would later come out and say that Darren wasn't really the most supportive during this time. I mean, let's bear in mind, it was 1996 and women were just described as being crazy 24/7 back then. But Darren would often chalk her really down days up to the baby blues, or she was feeling a little bit sad. It was never really treated as something that was quite serious and had to be addressed, and Darlie never sought help for any of her mental health issues. This wasn't wasn't the only red flag in their relationship at this time. Darren was working an extensive amount of hours, so therefore Darlie would be left alone with her 3 boys to cope all by herself in that big house. Now I know what you're thinking, first world problems, but Darlie was really struggling at this time. Darren would be working unspeakable hours and she would be left to fend for herself with these 2 little boys and her newborn baby. She was having a hard time sleeping during this time. It was said that she would constantly sleep down in the living room just to get a little bit of peace and quiet because baby Drake was quite restless, so he would constantly be tossing and turning in his crib, which was in their bedroom, and she was just not getting any sleep at all because she was such a light sleeper. Team this exhaustion with the postnatal depression she'd been experiencing, and yet nothing good can come of that. In fact, even on that fateful night of the 6th of June 1996, Darren would later say that he and his wife had discussed her postnatal depression and how it was affecting her. The events that took place later that night will leave you on either side of a fence, or it might leave you, like most people, slap bang middle in the fence and wondering what to think. Darlie Routier places a bone-chilling 911 call at exactly 2:31 a.m. When the first officer arrives to the family's home, it is clear that some sort of crime has taken place on the ground floor. It's like a bloodbath. Darren Routier had attempted CPR on his eldest son, Devon, but it was no use. Little 6-year-old Devon was gone. Devon had actually been stabbed twice in the chest, and the knife had gone through with so much force that the point of the blade had actually scraped the flooring beneath the carpet. Only feet away from his brother lay 5-year-old Damon Routier, and he was lying face down with several stab wounds in his back. Miraculously, little Damon was still alive, but for him, time was running out. They needed an ambulance and they needed it fast. Medical experts would say that because of his extensive injuries, he literally had about 8 or 9 minutes to live from the final blow. One of the saddest things about this was the fact that Damon was really gentle, always a lover, never a fighter, and here you had this little boy literally fighting for his life. The mother of the 2 boys, Darlie, was looking kind of dicey herself. She wasn't looking great. She'd actually been stabbed in her forearm, which had gone right through to the bone. She'd been stabbed on her collarbone twice. She had several defensive wounds on her hand and several bruises on her arms and hands. Darlie also had a large slash across her throat. The only reason she had survived this wound is because it was literally 2 millimeters away from her carotid artery. Had the knife nicked any closer, she would have died between 2 and 3 minutes. Darlie was still conscious when first responders arrived on scene, and she was seen holding a towel to her neck, trying to stem the bleeding. The crime scene itself was an absolute mess. There was blood everywhere in the living room. It led into the kitchen. There was broken glass on the kitchen floor. A vacuum cleaner had been overturned. There was also a little kind of side table that was laying on the side. It had been obvious there was a struggle in this house. There was also Darlie's bloody footprints that led all around the kitchen floor. In the utility room, there appeared to be a baseball cap laying in the middle of the floor, and police could also see a bloody knife that they believed had been used in the murder resting on the kitchen counter. Each item and its placement told investigators a story. But it wasn't just the evidence that had something to say, because Darlie had a little story to tell of her own. She claimed that she awoke in the middle of the night to a man attacking her. She fought for her life and the man fled, leaving through the kitchen, through the utility room and out towards the garage. She says that she saw this tall white male wearing a baseball cap fleeing the home and dropping the murder weapon on his way. Darlie says this is why she instinctively picked up the knife and sat it on the counter. Once the man had escaped the home, Darlie said she then switched on the lights and realised that there was glass and blood everywhere and that she had realised her children had been attacked. During her phone call with the 911 dispatcher, Darlie does make a point of saying about the fact she touched the knife when prompted by the dispatcher. It's not something she just volunteers on her own. The dispatcher says, now don't touch anything, and Darlie says, well, I've already touched something, I've touched a knife. So this isn't something that she just says on her own, which I think often people are confused about this, but she was actually asked not to touch anything and she was like, oh no, but I did already. Darlie claims that the minute she switched on the lights, she realised her children were there bleeding to death, and this is when she started screaming for her husband, Darren. Now she says she started screaming Darren, whereas Darren would later say she started screaming Damon. Now let's be honest, the names are super similar, so we'll let that one slide, I think. Now I do catch your vibes out there. Take someone especially horrific to murder children. Why would this random intruder break in this woman's house? But there is some things to support this. And Darlie's take on what happened that fateful night won't be the only thing that you'll be left questioning by the end of this episode. Because in good old police fashion, the way the crime scene was handled was... the word awful seems a little bit light. Not gonna lie, it was shite. I think that's an appropriate word if I'm honest. The first officer on scene, David Waddell, was... well, the only thing that he and the Routiers actually agree on is that he never provided any first aid to either one of the victims, not even to Darlie herself. There was a lot of disagreement between he and the Routiers as to what really happened when he arrived on scene. He said that he was constantly asking them to stem the bleeding with towels and to provide CPR to their own children, but apparently Darlie was more focused on herself and stemming her own wound to care about her dying children, and Darren himself wasn't really doing much of anything either. The couple, however, totally dispute this and say that no, they were running back and forth with towels for their children, but this man was completely inexperienced, and in the light of this horrific crime that he was not prepared for, he was like a deer in headlights and just stood there not knowing what to do. There are a few things that back up what the Routiers say. The fact that the officer never went to investigate where Darlie had said the perpetrator had gone. She said that he had ran off in the direction of the garage. He never went outside once to check. The home wasn't searched. He just stood in the living room watching over this family, living their worst nightmare. Even when the second officer arrived on scene, Matthew Walling, neither of the men still provided any first aid to these children, and the ambulance took quite a wee while to get there, and everyone was allegedly just standing around. In fact, when both officers were shown pictures of the crime scene later on in this case, they weren't really sure if certain things were there when they were in the room or whether they had been moved at a later date. For example, the vacuum cleaner that was seen on the crime scene photos laying on the kitchen floor, was this moved by first responders when they were trying to provide first aid to the children, or was this something that had happened during the struggle? Neither officer could tell you because they never looked around. Darlie and Darren claimed that they allegedly begged the officers to help their children as they had no clue what they were doing. Darren was performing CPR on his son, but it was said that air was coming out of his lungs and therefore more blood was coming out of his wounds, and he didn't want to cause any more harm to Devon, because at that point he never knew he wasn't going to survive. The 911 call does kind of back up what Darlie and Darren are saying, because you can hear Darlie begging, please save my babies. When medical assistance arrives at the Routiers' home, Devon is unfortunately pronounced dead at the scene. His younger brother, though clinging to life, is also later pronounced dead due to his injuries. This is every parent's worst nightmare. Darlie is heartbroken and she's rushed to hospital for surgery on her own injuries. Whilst Darlie is in surgery, it seems like everyone else lost their marbles. Yes, Darren arrives at the hospital, and after he's just lost two of his children, he thinks it's an appropriate thing to say to medical staff whilst his wife is in surgery, have you seen my wife? She's beautiful. She has the biggest boobs. Pardon? As he's acting like this, investigators are also getting a wee bit wild, because they think what better time to interview a grieving mother than when she's still sedated from surgery. Yes, boys and girls, they believe the perfect time to interview Darlie is when she's just come out of life-saving surgery. They believed that the sedation would act as some sort of weird truth serum, and it's no surprise that Darlie then changes her story. Instead of saying that she woke up fighting an intruder, she now was saying that she woke up to her young son Damon tapping and pulling on her shoulder. She said that's when she awoke to see a man walking away from her and she couldn't remember his face, and then when she chased after him he was too fast and she couldn't catch him. She said in this statement that she didn't see him drop the knife this time, but that the knife was on the floor, and when she switched on the lights, that's when she saw the blood everywhere and saw the knife on the floor and put it on the counter. So a little bit different, and she does change this story back and forth quite a few times. Now there's something that doesn't ring very true about this recollection, because you see Darlie is now trying to claim that she was asleep during her attack and that she had awoken with her injuries. Now this is also the same Darlie who was such a light sleeper that she couldn't sleep in the same room as her 7-month-old child because he would constantly toss and turn. Remember, that's why she was sleeping downstairs in the first place. Could she or anyone really sleep through this nightmare? The hospital staff would also later note some really alarming behaviour from Darlie. They said that she wasn't really asking about her children or anything like that, and she wasn't really sad or crying. They said she was more just like being whiny and annoying. I can't believe this happened to me. Nurse, get me a juice. Back at the crime scene, there was some things that weren't really adding up for investigators either. There were some serious inconsistencies between what Darlie said happened and what the actual evidence said happened. As they examined the blood drops and Darlie's footprints in the blood around the home, they soon noticed that the wine glass that was accidentally knocked over in the struggle looks a bit suspicious, because the wine glass that was sitting inside the wine rack and had accidentally fallen out would have had to have been physically lifted out of the wine rack and dropped on the floor. You see, the wine rack had a mechanism in it that was to prevent this sort of thing from happening if it was knocked over. Also, something to note about the broken glass is that Darlie claimed that she ran over the broken glass, but she had no cuts on her feet. So therefore, Darlie had walked through the kitchen, bled on the kitchen, and then dropped a wine glass on it. Also, probably most damning was the fact that the knife used in the murder was from the Routiers' own knife block. So was this just the most unorganised killer in the world? Had he come in with nothing but his own 2 hands? When investigators were doing door-to-door inquiries, they found something a little bit strange. It was a sock. It was actually Darren Routier's sock, and it was stained with the blood of his 2 sons. This was found hanging over a storm drain in the middle of the street, only 75 yards away from the home. Had this item been discarded by the killer, or had someone left it there to make it look that way? Quite quickly, investigators had ruled out any sort of financial motive or robbery, because Darlie's very expensive jewellery, her gold rings, her diamond rings, were actually sitting on the kitchen counter. So therefore, if someone had come in, they would have seen them, grabbed them, and probably just left. Like I said, this woman was bougie, and no one was leaving these carrots lying behind. One of the things that you think would lead investigators to look into the idea of an intruder breaking into the home was something in the garage. It was a torn screen that had been cut to get into the garage. Now, it was quite a large window that someone could step into. However, investigators found it kind of strange because criminals don't normally tear screens. They normally just pop them out of the frame. 1, it's quieter, and 2, they then have a clear point of entry to just step into. Because of this, they think, that seemed like it could have been staged. Why don't we test the other knives in the Routiers' knife block? The blood spatter experts also have something to say about this crime scene. Darlie claims that she was running around like a madman after this killer. However, the blood drops in the kitchen would suggest otherwise. You see, this is actually something I noticed, and I'm not even a forensic detective. I did see this and think she wasn't running, because the blood drops on the kitchen floor were perfectly round, which would be more consistent of someone literally standing in one place and dripping onto the floor. If Darlie had been running or moving at a higher speed than walking, the blood drops would have formed in more of a teardrop shape, but they weren't. It's almost as if she was walking around the kitchen, stopped, let a little bit of blood flow, a little drippy drip, and then she smeared it around. Darlie had also originally stated to the first responding officer that she saw the killer drop the knife on the kitchen floor, and that's why she picked it up. However, there was no impression mark on that kitchen floor or spatter from where the knife would have fallen. There was, though, signs that the knife had been laying somewhere else, on the living room floor, on the carpet. So would a killer really have set down a bloody knife during a violent struggle, leaving himself unarmed? Darlie's point of attack, shall we say, from when her throat was cut, still remains a mystery. Investigators to this day say that there was not enough blood on the pillows or on the sofa for her to be attacked in that spot. Her family and her team to this day dispute this. Darlie is adamant that her throat was cut on the couch. However, let's talk about the sink. Never thought I'd say that in a sentence. Let's talk about the sink. Welcome to True Crime YouTube. But it held some secrets of its own. All you could see was a couple of splashes, a couple of bits of blood here and there. But then investigators used that old magical elixir that is luminol, and as they say in every awful true crime documentary, it lit up like a Christmas tree. There was blood dripping down the cabinet, there was blood all over the handles in the kitchen, there was blood all in the sink and down the drain in the sink, as if someone had cleaned up after themselves. So pray tell, did this intruder have time to run away from crazed mother Darlie and clean up after himself? Or was this someone else trying to hide their tracks? Most of the blood found in the sink was that of Darlie Routier's. Is it possible that there wasn't enough blood on the couch because she had slit her own throat over the sink? Investigators certainly thought so. In fact, police actually later admitted that they had kind of had this case done and dusted and thought that Darlie was a suspect after 30 minutes on the scene. So that's wonderful. Without much evidence, the first 30 minutes were them standing about wasting time, so I don't know how much they could have really seen from that vantage point, but okay. Over the next few days, Darlie would be interviewed, and to her credit, she never actually hired a lawyer at this point in time. She didn't lawyer up, she just wanted to give as much information to police as possible. She also had her injuries photographed, which showed the deep gash across her throat. She also had 2 incision wounds near her collarbone. She had the deep cut in her forearm, which had cut right through to the bone, and she had some superficial wounds on her hands as well as bruising. Now the bruising is extremely severe. She has massive bruising on the back of her arms, and I don't even know if someone could fake that or how someone would even get that. I mean, would you jam your arm in a door? Who knows? Can't say I've ever faked evidence before, so I wouldn't be able to tell you, unfortunately. On Darlie's hands, she also had a couple of deep scores on her left hand, which she claims were when she was struggling for the knife with her attacker. Everyone, including investigators and the district attorney, talk about these superficial wounds that Darlie had experienced. I'm sorry, but one of those wounds was on her forearm, cut right through to the bone. To the bone, man! Also, bear in mind, someone nuts is running towards you. The first thing you would do, put your arm up and defend yourself. And that's exactly where the cut was. Darlie's deep gash across her throat was 2mm away from her carotid artery. How would she know that? I'm not being funny. She was a beautiful woman. She was not the sharpest pencil in the box. She didn't have any medical professional training, so how would she have known exactly where to stop? It was also proven that the knife hadn't nicked her carotid artery because of a pendant that she was wearing, which actually had to be surgically removed from the wound. Whilst I was researching this case, it became quite obvious pretty fast that the evidence wasn't the only thing that would be called into question in this case, and definitely wasn't the only deciding factor in this young woman's guilt. Only 8 days after his murder, Darley's eldest son Devon was due to turn 7 years old. The family held a really nice memorial service. It was over 2 hours long, and the family were extremely emotional. They were crying, they were hugging each other, and it was just a lovely prayer vigil in honour of her lost children. However, the occasion that would follow this emotional ceremony would be something that would brand Darlie Routier as a vicious killer forever. This event would give this case its infamous name of the Silly String Murders. So guys, that's the end of part 1 of this episode. It is a very long one, so unless you want to be sitting there for about 3 hours, I have to finish it here. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of the Darlie Routier case, and I hope you'll tune in next week for part 2. Please give this video a big thumbs up for me, and if you fancy, hit that notification bell so you don't miss me. If you're watching this right now and you're thinking, she's okay, also her clown makeup is forgivable, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you every Friday with our True Crime Killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our Weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. If you want to follow me, not around my hometown, because that's a little inappropriate and a lot illegal, on Instagram at Megan True Crime. I also have a TikTok page at Megan.truecrime. Don't worry, I don't shake my boobs and I don't get my bum out on that. I will be here for you with part 2 very shortly. Please fight the urge to Google and just remain on the edge of your seats. We'll be right back. Lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and also don't settle for just any old job. Make sure you work somewhere fun like Sizzler. See ya!